Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Ba'ashem, Kakadash, and give honor to the apostles and elders of the millstone. Shalom to the Hakim, Jesus' word, thought the four corners, and true sincerity. I'm back on that lesson, through the spirit by Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Lord, be edifying unto the elect. Alright, the topic of this lesson is basically me going into, the stages being set. Alright, the stage is being set, for World War III. As you see these different nations, Iran, America, Israel, constantly butting heads and them constantly, going at it with each other. Even though Trump is speaking of ceasefire, it's, ultimately going according to prophecy. Alright, what the Lord is, what the Lord wants to do, alright, within the earth, by causing World War III. Alright, because World War III is in the midst of World War III must happen. Because even though you may see, Trump said a ceasefire, even before that, how he didn't say he wouldn't go into any wars. He ended up being, dragged along, into it. It's all for the tune of prophecy, all for the will, of Yahweh Shemashai, which was ultimately lead to the destruction of America. All right, so we coming into those times where, things are only going to get harder and prophecy is just going to keep on, speeding up till we get the fuck up out of here. All right, until America's destroyed. All right, and I made lesson on it before that this war is not going nowhere, and other brothers and elders and apostles said it as well that this war is not going nowhere. All right, this is Proverbs 21:1. This is the king's heart. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. Yahweh, as a river turn it, he turn it whatsoever he will. So, even though Trump said he didn't want to get into a war, all right, the stage has to be set. All right, even though Trump thinks that he can do this or he can move it like this, the Lord has him in a trick bag, because we already know how these Edomites think. Starting with the rich, the elite banking families, that they want to fulfill their new world order. All right, but that's not to the tune of prophecy, right? The Lord must and will, do according to his pleasure. All right, like the scriptures say in Isaiah 55:11, it says, "So shall my word that goeth forth out of my mouth, it shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper everything whereto I sent it." So again, everything is going to the tune of prophecy. All right, nothing, can escape the will of Yahweh Shemel Shai. All right, niggas, Esau think he got free will, that you can do whatever you want. All right, fulfill your new world order, but that's not prophecy, right? Like going into this war, I should talk about Jeremiah 50:45. It says, "Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord Yahweh that he had taken against Babylon." All right, so let's hear the counsel, all right, that the Lord has taken against Babylon. Babylon represented America, not ancient Babylon, but the Babylon of today. All right, which represents America. And it says, and his purposes. What is the Lord's purpose? What is the Lord's purpose for America, for it to be destroyed? All right, because this place is moving in the spirit of Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, by letting, man be with man and woman be a woman. Right, and that's just only one example. All right, and all the wickedness that it pushes out throughout the four corners of the earth. All right, this place is reaped. All right, ripe, for judgment. It says in his purposes that he had proposed against the land of the Chaldeans. Again, talking about America. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. Right, meaning it was going to drag America into a war via, Israel. All right, you even have different politicians, celebrities, even a regular average, soldier or Marine, talking about how Israel controls America, how America's influenced by Israel, or how, Marines. I video a couple months ago how that Marine, spoke out at that meeting, how it went viral, talking about how they don't want to fight Israel's wars anymore. Even what's going on in the beginning of this war, troops purposely flushing their toilets so they didn't have to, fight, in this war. All right, going into the tune of prophecy. All right, no matter what they do, no matter what they say, this is how the Lord has it to be. Even though it may seem like it's unfair, it's what the Lord wants to do. All right, because it's going to lead to the destruction of America. All right, that's why you have the Euphrates River drying up. That's why you have, not only just Iran, but Russia and China as well is going to ultimately, join, or already has, joined, this war, whether it's being, reported about or not. All right. Why do you think, America's main adversaries are America's main adversaries are Russia, representing Gog and Magog, right? It says Zephaniah 1. No, not Zephaniah 1. Zephaniah 3. Zephaniah 3 and 8, it says, therefore, wait ye upon me, said the Lord. Talking about, us. We have to be patient to what the Lord is trying to do, all right? Because we see the steps of what the Lord is doing, all right, through these leaders. All right. How he's causing that this war won't let up. How he's causing it that America looks weaker and weaker. How the Lord is, making it plain that Israel, all right, is really in control of these politicians and in control of the president, right? Everything is being exposed. We just have to remain patient and suffer to save the Lord Yahweh until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations, right? This is the Lord's will, to gather these nations, right? That I may assemble the kingdoms for upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger. For all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. So the Lord is determined to gather these nations in the Middle East. That's why it's always tension within there. All right, but I'm using three characters, at the moment: America, Iran, and Israel, right? But the Lord is going to gather these nations in the Middle East to ultimately destroy them all. Because at the end of the day, all these nations, all right, are the enemies, of Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, read Psalms 83. That's why I said the stage is being set. The stage is being set for ultimately the full movie. All right, where all these nations are going to be, ultimately shooting, nukes at each other. That's why you see other nations that didn't have nukes before, they possess, nuclear capabilities. All right. When you go to Joel 2, when you go to Joel 2, or Joel 3, slugging. And 10. It says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say I am strong. So the Lord is now giving these weaker nations our nuclear capabilities. All right. Now they bucking up. Now they teaming up with these other nations, Russia. All right. You have the BRICS nations. All right. Nations that wasn't talking shit against America before, they now talking shit. Right now they have a sense of they have that strength, right? They're showing forth strength now, right? Because before they wouldn't do that. Because remember, America, represents what, the hammer of the earth. It's supposed to be the top nation on the planet Earth, the top, bad, bully, on the earth. Even the scriptures call this place the hammer of the earth. But now, all right, nations are coming up against her. Even before, you have reporters, saying that, America is supposed to be, the top nation on earth. Why we just can't just go into Iran and just take it down? Why is it taking so long? Like, what's the issue? Like, why can't we just take them down? Right? Because the Lord is causing, again, like it says in Matthew 13, all right, the Lord is, muster the host of the battle, right? He's behind the scenes, right? Because, the scriptures talk about, in scripture, the Lord is the man of war, who invented war, all right, Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, so he's causing certain pieces to be played. All right, playing into the mindset, the spirit of the people, the spirit of the soldiers. All right, that no matter what America does, that they're still able to fight. That even times past that they were able to prepare themselves for this time. Right, the will of Yahweh Shemel Shai. All right. With that long, when this lesson was edified, I want to give our praises to Yahweh Shemel Shai, Bashem Kakodash. The ball in the city of Pausing, Elders Millstone, and Shalom to the Hakim teaching. Out of the four corners, angels, and sincerity, almost out of here. Shalom.